Well, welcome again to the St. Genevieve Museum Learning Center Spotlight Series, and I understand I was really missed last week, huh?
Last month you were I was there, and believe me, you were missed.
Well, welcome back. I'm the Director of Education for the museum, and I have a group of people here that I'm actually going to let them introduce themselves and tell us why they wanted to be here tonight. We have a lot to show you. So I'm going to start on my right. And Bob, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Bob Roth. I'm one of the executive board members of the Museum Learning Center and also a trustee for our 501c3.
Thank you for being here.
Hey, my name is Mike Mcdaniel, and I'm a middle school social studies teacher at St. Genevieve Middle School, 6th grade American History 1, 7th grade American History 2, and I am currently our department chair right now.
Hi, I'm Rachel McDaniel. I'm also teaching at the middle school at St. Genevieve. I teach 6th grade American History and 8th grade World History.
Hi, I'm Riley Siebert, and I'm a freshman at Valley Catholic.
I'm Jordan Weiler, and I'm a junior at Valley Catholic.
I'm Davis Gergatis. I'm the head of the History Department of Valley Catholic High School. I brought these two fine students with me tonight. So I teach World History, American History, U.S. Government, and Geography at Valley.
I'm Sarah Menard, and like Bob, I am on the museum executive board and a trustee. And I'm excited to be here because I've been hearing about this collection for a good long while, and this is the first I've seen any of it. It's exciting.
My name is Guy Darrow. I'm the museum curator, and I love ancient historical items, and I like prehistoric items. And I was involved with the fellow that donated this to us, so hopefully I can give you a little idea what we got here on the table.
And last but not least, I'm Rich Rebecki. I am also an executive board member and a trustee. If he's the department head, he's really your boss now, huh? Okay, that's good to know. But anyway, thank you all for being here. My role with the museum is public relations. So without you folks, Jan and I are just sitting here talking across from one another. So thank you for being here. And Jan, it's all yours.
Well, we have a great collection in front of you tonight. This has been donated to the Museum Learning Center, and Guy knows the most about it. And he's going to be sharing a little bit about the different cultures where the artifacts came from and a little history around each one of them. And feel free tonight for anyone to just interject with a question. Ask more about what you're seeing. There's a lot out there. Guy will get it started, but please this is a very comfortable, relaxed conversation. Lots to understand about what we're seeing and how it's going to be utilized in the Museum Learning Center. So Guy, tell us about this. Tell us about how it even came to us, if you want, and then start to share the different cultures.
I became interested in Viking artifacts, and they kind of came on the market about 8-10 years ago, and more were hitting the market, and I was really interested, so I started seeking out the people that were selling them, the different dealers and that, and I ran across this fella, Danny Harris, and we became good friends. It ended up that he would send me artifacts to check and make sure they weren't fakes or forgeries, and I wanted to do that because I wanted to learn the difference between forgeries and the originals. And then we got a friendship going, and at one point he called me. He said, you know, I'm really to a point where I'd like to donate some of my material, and he asked if our museum would, and I told him yes, we would really like to have these items, because it's just stuff that you don't normally see in the Midwest or anything. It's just kind of different. And so that's how that all, he approached us on us, and we had him appraised and went through that process, and now we own many thousand artifacts. A lot of them are not cleaned, and which good opportunity for all of us here to learn how to do that. So at some point, but if you want, I'll just
head on
start
to show us what you've got there.
This right here is a Viking sickle, and there are actually a lot of rusty old Viking sickles out there, believe it or not, but this one was really more complete. Normally you just get a piece of the handle and a piece of one, but this is pretty complete, and it's something that's 1,000 years old. It's in pretty good condition, and since we've got an agricultural section of the museum that we have to do an exhibit for, I like to add a lot of these ancient agricultural things, from other cultures and that. So this is really, and it's not preserved. It's something that needs to be gone through the process to take care of it and get it preserved, but it's something that we can do. And
So do you know what a sickle is used for? Have you ever heard of a sickle? Because some of you are from...
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it's used for.
well, that would be for different wheats and grains, and at that time, and
Harvesting. They used to harvest by hand,
Yeah.
and so they would just cut it off.
yeah, and I'm
Gather
guessing
it in.
just hay for the horses and things of that nature too.
I would
But,
get there, some in your barn.
Probably so.
yeah, they're just shaped a little different, but not too much different probably.
Guy, when you talk about preserving that, what's involved in the preservation of an artifact like that? What
Sometimes
do you do?
you use a process called electrolysis, and Danny has given us his electrolysis machine. And what it is there's a liquid it's an electrolyte that you form, and there's electrode that'll go in, and there's a certain amount of current that's put to that, and then one of the wires goes to the electrode, and the other one will go to your item, and that rust will leave that ancient item, and it'll migrate over to the other electrode and collect, and you've got to kind of watch it because it can go too far.
Sure.
But after that would be cleaned to the point, you clean it by hand as much as it would come off by hand, then you could go to the electrolysis process if you wanted. I think this isn't good enough shape that really, once it's cleaned by hand, there's this stuff that they sell called Renaissance wax, and a lot of artifact collectors use it, especially on iron, because you can preserve it and restore it, and then that iron in 2 or 3 years, all of a sudden you'll notice in your collection that it's dropping iron, rust dandruff. And but if you put this wax on it, you heat it up, put it on, it sinks in really deep, and it'll preserve it for years.
Keeps
So-
it from further rust.
Yeah, keep it from rusting any further.
So one thing is you're talking about kind of almost like an old tried and true method, and you're talking about more of kind of a technological advancement, to be able to do these things. I mean, how much have you seen the technological advancement or science making history better whenever you've been, doing these things?
Well, there's all kinds of things that are way out of my league, but one of the things that's helping is, for instance, in the Ukraine, a lot of this is coming out of Russia, and there's many problems over there, and everybody's very poor that lots of people are getting a metal detector, because if they've got any kind of property at all, over here we got couple hundred years in the soil. Over there it's just layer of culture after culture after culture, and it's all bronze and iron and lead and silver and gold, and there's so many metal detectors over there that all of a sudden there's an influx, and it really gives you more of an idea what the items that culture would have had. And so for me, it's just the influx of material that I have access to study. And of course, for finding things, they've got all these different radars and different things. But, a lot of times it really comes down to handwork still with things like this. If I was going to clean this fish hook, for instance, you carefully clean what you can off by hand, and something that delicate, you wouldn't want to use the electrolysis process because it may disappear, and the rust that it's made out of might just be at the other electrode or something. But a lot of it's just handwork. It's like these coins. These are Roman coins, and over in Europe in those areas, they'll find what they call hoards, and it's very common to find a few pounds or hundreds of these, because if you're a person going to war at that time, for instance, you may not come back. Chances are you're not going to come back. So there weren't like banks, that you get your little ticket that you put your money in, and it's just something that these people buried their material, and they were dead, and these things are out there, and they find them quite often. But something like this, you would soak in olive oil for maybe a month, and then with a little toothpick, something that would not scratch the bronze, you carefully clean that away, and if you put enough time in, hand time it, all of a sudden a little face of an emperor or something will come to light, or a horse, or some little effigy or something, and so most of that's there are ways to clean that with modern techniques. There's a chemical electrolysis process too that you can even do, but
This one would appear to have some kind of lettering on it or
Yeah,
some
around
kind
the
of
edge
image.
there.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
those are robust coins
Yeah.
there. Those will probably have something really cool
There's
on them.
definitely some writing on mine as well.
Yeah.
And
So
it
you
looks
can
like
make
there's
Like
a,
a bust.
Bust on some of those over there.
Uh-huh, yeah. And
So these have not been cleaned?
no, and these
Yeah.
would have, these, at the time they were used, would have been shiny, bronze, shiny, gold-colored, beautiful coins, you
So
know?
there's still dirt on my fingers.
Yeah.
I'm passing
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
it does. I bet you
Yeah,
that's.
a lot of them are ready for a project to be
Oh,
cleaned.
yeah, that's
So is there a
lot.
way to know whose bust would primarily show up on the coins that you have?
There'll be books that show all of these coins. I'm sure there's nothing extremely rare there, but there's enough books out there that you can look at some, at least figure out maybe what emperor, what, century they're from, but a lot of times these are a couple thousand years old. It's very common for them for it to
So
be like that.
do the governments discourage people from selling that or shipping it out of the country?
I think what the deal is over there is if you find a hoard, you're supposed to report it to the government, and then if there's anything of value there, really value, then you're supposed to, but then they let you, I believe, have the rest,
Okay.
And it's totally legal to be buying Roman coins. They've been on the market before we were born. Coin collectors loved them, and it just goes way back. Even in the Roman times, the Romans were collecting ancient coins. It's just the way that it is. But yeah, there'll be some cool things come out of those
This
right
one
there.
right here, you can already see, my Latin is not perfect, but you can tell that it says Octavian there, so
Really?
it's a pretty good, very
Yeah, that's a
clear.
heavy duty coin.
One of the, one of the days of the appraisal, I went over,
Yeah.
And,
Is that a date?
when they said that this was Roman coins,
Could be.
jokingly, I said, geez, I feel like Julius Caesar. And one of the appraisers said, he could have very easily handled that because the bag that was out and open was from his time.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Yeah. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, these were not all from one man's stash probably. Every one of them coins probably were from some other person. I mean, the amount of history and people's lives just involved with those coins there, it just would be cool to know, but
So guys, share
lost
some of the
antiquity.
ideas that you have around cleaning these coins and bringing in school-age children to kind of help with this project. Can you talk about that a little bit?
We've done that before as a project, and it works out real good, especially if they get to take home their coin, because if they don't, it's a little bit depressing. But there's a lot of smaller coins, they'll end up being around $1 in quantity. Sometimes somebody is 75 cents. You'd think, how can you get a coin 2,000 years old for 75 cents? But that's just how many of them that there were over there. So and we soaked them for a while in olive oil and gave everybody toothpicks, and by the end of the couple hours, everybody was happy. I mean, little faces were showing up and little animals and stuff. And, I mean, how can you go wrong with a 2,000-year-old coin that you get to take home after you clean it? So it's a very popular little project. I'm hoping it's something we can do a lot, because they're available. They're
And
not,
I want to do it too. I don't want to just hand it over.
Yeah.
no,
I want to do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to take one home, yeah.
yeah, no problem. So that's
Sarah,
what
you're
I'm
just
hoping
a
will work
big
out.
And we, as a sidebar to this, we have discussed, maybe shortly after we open the new facility, to purchase one of those industrial vans and have a museum on wheels. And something like this, if the high school, the middle school, the elementary school wanted to get involved in a cleaning project, we could actually bring the stuff, the supplies, show you what to do,
Oh, yeah.
and then go on to another school, and by the end of the day, we'll have a bunch of coins cleaned, and every kid that did some cleaning can go home with a coin.
Yeah, and hopefully they could also come to the museum where we can provide them the area to do this
And
also.
then, yeah,
Well, and I think too, it serves the purpose, it's almost like a teaser in a way, to get the kids interested,
Yeah.
to come down and then see that,
Yeah.
kind of that PR sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, kids nowadays don't get a chance. When I was a kid, my pocket was full of shells and snails and rocks and fossils and, little things. And a lot of kids don't get a chance to, and almost everybody when I was small collected coins or stamps, things like that. Once they get a chance to hold that stuff, that's what's liable to spring them and, get them
Yeah.
away totally from their little machine. And with that machine, they'll be able to look up exactly what's going on. But it's just, if you're touching the stuff and you're finding it, for instance, or anything like that, that's what sets you off. It's lacking nowadays among students to have that. I remember growing up that all of a sudden they took history away, and I think they put social studies in there or something. I wasn't good in school, but the history was gone. My first little reader, I think, was called Hastings Mills, and it was about a pioneer family, and talking about all the pioneer things, and you don't even hear about any of that now, and that was in a first grade reader. So I think when people, are allowed to touch this stuff, and in our museum, we're hoping that in many cases we can do it. There'll be an exhibit, and then there'll be something you can touch, that can be touched, wouldn't be hurt by the public. We're going to try to do that, so you can kind of touch your way through time.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think that makes a big difference, get people interested in things.
Yep. Fully interactive.
Go through this right here. These are fishing hooks, and I in particular like ancient fishing hooks. I've got one that's actually an Ice Age fishing hook, which would be 10 or 12,000 years old. So
Wow.
they go back to the mastodons and mammoths. People were making fishing hooks. But some of these are bronze, and some of these are iron. The dark ones are iron. And I guess in the very beginning you had a club or some rocks you're trying to whap, get a fish. But at some point somebody started coming up with the idea to hook them. And after that took off, that really took off the hook. And one cool thing is I had a chance to purchase some Viking fishing lures, which I was a little suspicious of. But once I seen them, you could, but what they did is they would take an iron fishing hook and they would, with the lost wax cast process, they would take that wax and they would make a lure shape, like a little fish, a stylized fish with scales and eyes. Cool looking. And they would pour that lead over this with a little mold, and then when you take off your clay, you end up with a lead fishing lure shaped like a little fish over your iron fishing hook. And I have some really nice ones, but the electrolysis process takes over on its own, and since the lead and the iron were together over a long period of time, the iron just disintegrated and left the lead. So I thought it was really cool that I know there's a pewter shop here in town. I was going to go to them and see if maybe we can take the iron fishing hook and if maybe they can make a lure the way that the Vikings did,
Sure.
and then we could maybe, in that part of the exhibit, have that on a little monitor showing, the Vikings, I'm sure there's fishing lures even before the Vikings, but at least the Vikings made some really cool looking fishing lures, not just hooks, but lures. So anyway, that's one of the things that I hope we can get worked out. These are arrowheads, and usually they're not bronze. They're usually mostly iron, except for like Celtic and some of the earlier cultures. And some of these, like this one with the this long shaft, those were made to where they would just stick in the arrow shaft with no glue or no wrapping. And the reason being, when they went into somebody, they could try to pull that out, but it would just come right off, and that would stay.
Yeah.
Pretty nasty stuff. And then they were also saying if they shot, a few hundred arrows like they do at times you see in the movies, that was all things they did. Those things would hit, and then when the shafts would come off, these little points are still sticking up. So you got horses and people and all this dealing with that. So a lot of really nasty stuff was built into their shapes. There's some barbed ones and things that we have, like you might see on Robin Hood or something, but a lot of that goes way, way back, those big barbed points. And we have some of them too, it's just they're not clean.
So some of these, like this one, for instance, that's a weapon, not necessarily a hunting tool.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And especially the ones with that you don't want to come out, those are usually made to shoot at your. And some really nasty ones too.
Yikes.
Yeah, and then there's these things called Caltrops, which look like a jack, jacks that you'd play with, except each part is a point. And whichever way you throw that down, there's always a point sticking up. And they would seed the battlefield with those. And I mean, the horses and everything, it was just bad, the things that they, a lot of things they did, but usually something with a sharp point on it.
I wonder how long it took them to make that one little tool back in those days.
You mean one of these?
Are those little barbs you're talking about?
Oh, those? Yeah, probably for somebody that knows what they're doing, that may be a 15-minute episode. I mean, it's hard to believe, but if you're good at making nails at that time, you're popping out a nail every 5 minutes, and they look pretty good, and they're pretty uniform. I mean, they're ancient people, but the metalworking is remarkable, really, how it is. I mean, so these, for instance, these nails, these are bronze nails, and some of those would have been from Viking ships because they were using bronze to.
So are those rose head nails?
No, well, there's a lot of rose head at that time. You can see probably a little on here, but that rose head, really, you see a lot of that in the newer, especially in the 1700s and then areas like that. But I'm sure some of these are rose-headed. But if you look at them, some of them are really round, decorative heads. And I guess they were going with the bronze because bronze is a nautical metal that's used. And some of these probably would have been. I was reading the other day looking at some of them, these 3 or 4 inch ones that were used for putting ships together. This one right here is a horseshoe nail, by the way. That guy right there with the funny top. And I really like ancient horse bridles and especially the history of the horseshoe. I mean, they just didn't start off with a horseshoe. They started out with all kinds of little appliances and different little funny things that would grab the ice, and so I've been trying to snatch them up. I have horses, and I've been trying to snatch up. I've got some Viking horseshoes, and the oldest ones would be like Roman, and they're unfortunately like, if you can even buy one, they're $10,000, $12,000.
Wow.
Yeah, they're called a hippa sandal is what they're called, but I would really even like to have a piece of one of those, but they're just very hard to get. But so anyway, there's some bronze nails. Here we have some basically Viking jewelry. The same similar beads would have been used here and there all over the, especially in Europe, areas like that. And the very same manufacturing techniques to make these was used all the way up into the fur trade, St. Genevieve era, that would have been traded to the fur traders or the Hudson Bay Company and to the Indians or whatever. It's very similar because I have some that are a couple hundred years old, and they're just almost identical to a lot of these. So, and there's a lot that goes into a single bead. If you look at some of them beads, they're very decorative, and I'm sure on Channel 9 you've seen where they've drawn out glass rods as long as this room. Pretty easy. And then they clip them. And then they get they'll clip them smaller, and then they'll heat them up. But anyway, they end up being beads, and the same techniques were used back then. It's hard to believe that they would take a piece of glass and draw it out the length of this room. But it was really easy at that time for the people that knew what they were doing. So and then we have some of these gastropods, snail shells. They're called cowries. And cowries were used, they started using them about 3,000 years ago in China as money. These are very dried out looking and white, kind of desiccated, but they would have been really beautiful blues, just like jewelry. So when the first ancient people seen them, their eyeballs were popping out. It's like these are something really special. So, and these would have been all gorgeous too. And the Vikings eventually, it sifted into different cultures. And in the African culture, at one point, I believe just one of these would buy you a slave or a wife or whatever. And then I think it got to the point where it was 10 cowries for a wife because they're going up a little more. But at one point, those were used for that. And the name for one of these cowries is Cyprea monita, is a species. and the moneta is because it's called the money cowrie, because they were used as money. And the way they collected these, they would take palm tree branches, weight them down, put them down 15, 20 foot in the ocean, let them set for a week or two, and then these little snails would all go all over them. They'd pull them up, and then they'd pick them off, and that's how they would glean those. So, but the cowrie was used as money by a lot of cultures, but I think they started about 3,000 years ago is when they actually started using those.
So these Viking items, are they from a particular country? Can we pinpoint them in Scandinavia, or are we looking at some Ukrainian, more like?
I thought the Vikings
Kiev
were all
area.
a Scandinavian bunch too when I first started,
So
but then
they
it's
made
like
that
they're
movement
all
into
through.
Kiev and into
they're
modern-day
Russia. I mean,
Ukraine and Russia, and that's
yeah.
where
Even
Russia
Europe.
comes from.
Yeah.
Is from those.
Well, the
early Vikings.
Kievan Rus, R-U-S, I believe, right?
Yes.
But there's a number of different, I guess you call it clans or cultures among the Vikings. But all this stuff Danny was saying, most all this is from Bulgaria, which is all right over there. I mean,
So more riverine Vikings than ocean-going Vikings.
yeah, and I had no idea that they were scattered so many different areas. But the Vikings, boy, they were everywhere.
I mean, these are the type of things you could still find in Turkey and the Middle East that can be found in some of those hordes from the trading networks that they
Yeah,
developed.
and a lot of times on these Viking settlements, you'll find a lot of Islamic coins and stuff. I mean, and they would use them as decorations and jewelry, and for trade, and you find a lot of them for sale that are cut up in little sections where they took a chisel and took an Islamic coin and broke it up in pieces for different denomination, I guess. But yeah, it's amazing how far the Vikings, they were everywhere. I mean, it's really a lot of places that the Romans were, the Vikings were, a lot of places that the Celts were, of course, the Vikings and the Romans, and it's just what layer you happen to be digging at the time that would tell you what culture that would be. These right here, these look like needles and awls, and that's actually what they are, cloak pins for holding your cloak on or keeping your clothes from falling off. Some of these are actually medical instruments. Haven't studied them enough. I've seen a lot of them, but I haven't studied enough to know the difference. Of course, the ones that have the big eyelets obviously are big needles, and but some of them are awls just for making a hole in leather. And then some of them have little zoomorphic effigies on the top, and I know those are Roman. And they're called votive items, and that's usually you're doing a prayer or something to some god or whatever, and they're little, you either praying on them or you're taking them to the temple and leaving them. And they made this stuff by the ton. I mean, by the ton. So they could afford to go leave some at the temple if they had to, But in there, almost all of that is bronze. I think I only see a couple iron pieces in there. And I'm not sure which ones are medical instruments, but that's something that we can eventually, research and find out. And that adds a whole nother little dimension, you can imagine what kind of horrible medical episodes.
You mentioned an ear spoon. Can you explain about the ear spoon?
Yeah, all of a sudden, I'd seen them years ago. You'd see a little ear spoon. The Viking women had this little regiment of items that would hang from around their neck or whatever, and it was a number of little things. They were all little useful tools, and one of them is this little ear spoon. I mean, and apparently it was a big deal to be cleaning your ears back then. These little, I mean, if you're an ancient guy, and you got a lot of wax in your ears, you got somebody grab one of these pointed things, sticky, so no, I'll take the little spoon, thank you, with the little rounded edge. But apparently that was a big deal because it was on the little
I think it's weird you would
bundle of little
your hygiene tools on you. I just wouldn't think to.
Well, there's a little knife. There's a little like scissors. Vikings may not have invented scissors, but they sure used a lot of them. In the beginning, they look like little sheep shears in the beginning. The ones that are like this, that they got into some of that too, but a lot of the Viking scissors that you see on the market that are 1,000 years old, that are definitely Viking, they look like little sheep shears. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, I mean, that was a big deal for them. And those are all things they'd have hanging around because they used them all the time. And there's so many of them, those exact items that you see, that must have been a very common thing, you know, to have to keep your little utility pack of, you know,
Viking Swiss
tools.
Army knife.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a certain shaped little knife with a certain shaped little sheath that always fits on there too. And I see enough of those things on the market too that you can tell that was just keeping up with the next, you know, you got your batch of jewelry, it's all shiny and pretty little items, and, you know, they want to keep up with the next bite of the Joneses, you know, so they all had a similar thing. These right here, and I really like these because I like the history of fire. But these are called fire steels. Some people call them fire strikers, but they're really fire steels. But if you were back at that time and you wanted to have a smoke with your pipe, if you wanted to get your campfire going or cook something, you had to have one of these. These are particularly very odd ones. And we have tons of plain ones of all variety, but Danny liked these. And so the ones that you're seeing in there are like probably 1 out of 200 or 300, you know. And for instance, this one here is the biggest one I've ever seen in my life. That looks like an American one that would have been from the fur trade period. They get to that size. But with one of these, you know, a little bit of, usually they would take some kind of cloth and you would burn it, but you'd smother it, you'd put it in something. Nowadays, you'd put it in a tin can, throw it on a campfire, and when you pull your piece of cloth out, it'll all be together, but it will come apart real easy, and if you just barely get a spark on it, man, it just takes it like wild. And that little spark will start going zzz, zzz. You'll see it on that char cloth. I mean, you can get a fire started within, you know, 30 seconds or something if you know what you're doing, because these will throw out a good spark. I've got some replica ones, and it don't take much, and it'll throw a shower of sparks out. And you just need something dry. Could be out of a mouse nest or who knows what, you know, some bark off some tree that's really fuzzy or whatever. But this is what everybody was so common, and you find tons of them because at one point when matches came into being, I think they called them lucifers or something, and they go back fairly recent, you know, but when that happened, then all these were like, you know, you throw it down or drop it off to the blacksmith or whatever, and that's why there's so many of them, because everybody had to have one or you'd freeze, you know, you wouldn't be able to eat or whatever, wouldn't be able to cook. So, and these are all about 1,000 years old, but these were still used all through the 1800s, 1700s, 1600s. A friend of mine up in St. Ignace area is working fur trade areas where we're getting some really nice strikers. I mean, a striker found in this country is worth a couple $100, a plain one, but there's so many of these over there that they're a lot more common. But the ones that we find, St. Genevieve period, for instance, ones, they're available, but they're always 100, 200, $300 because they're that rare, you know, over here. But at that time, everybody had them. Everybody. I've got fire strikers from the Neolithic period, which is prehistoric humans. And they're a very certain little shape, and you can see on the edges a very certain little wear, you know, that was made from. So those go back thousands and thousands of years, you know, 12,000 years or whatever or more. And anyway, it was a big deal, and everybody had to have one or you wouldn't survive.
That's really interesting. And if I had found something, just randomly found, I wouldn't know what that is. I mean, I would recognize it as a tool or part of a tool, but I wouldn't have a clue.
I don't think I would have recognized them either if I had, especially those oddball ones, unless I had seen a lot of them, because they're just odd, and there's odder ones than that. There's some cultures that have them that look like knives, and I think I think that's the Rus, the Kievan Rus had those. and I see those pop up on the market every once in a while, but I really like the history of fire, you know, just, you know, keeping yourself warm. You see a lot of times they'll have like these primitive people, these Ice Age people, and they'll be running around with bare legs with just a, you know, a buffalo hide over them or something. It's like those people were very smart. You know, you freeze your legs off for a while, and then you learn, I'm making some pants. I don't care what anybody says. They had clothes, and they had bone needles, and they knew how to make cordage, and they were making clothes. So they, you know, it's just like you hear a lot of maybe Ice Age people never rode horses or whatever, but I got news. I have horses. If I seen a little horse down in a mud hole back then, I'd get him out. Somebody would. And then after you had him for a while, you go, you know, I'm going to put something on his back. I'm tired of carrying this. And then after a while, it's like, yeah, put the kids up there. And after a while, they're riding horses. So for me, even though I ain't got any Ice Age saddles, it's pretty silly to think that they wouldn't take advantage. And then you can go farther. What if you found a little baby mammoth or mastodon in the pit? It's like, you know, he's your friend for a while. All of a sudden, he's carrying on his back the whole village. Everybody's stuff, you know.
Well, and I think they're coming out with fire even, they're predating fire even further than they used to, because they're finding instances of fire all over Europe and Asia, where previously they didn't think it existed, but now when they date things, it doesn't make sense because they had to have had fire.
It keeps
We're
going,
just so boxed in.
It keeps going back, and it's like they weren't waiting for lightning to strike, you know.
No, they weren't.
No. And I was just watching yesterday on this dual survival on the fella Cody and this other guy.
The Ted-Eye guy, the Marine.
It's hard, it's hard to believe how many different ways you can take wood and push it against another piece of wood, and all of a sudden it's hot enough. I think it's 800 degrees you got to get to, and then all of a sudden, you know, you got fire. So there again, you freeze your butt off for a while, and after a while you go, I'm going to figure this out, you know. I want to know how to do this bow drill or whatever it is. We're going to do it.
Well, that's why we always say history gets better as science gets better, because science is getting better and finding all this new stuff that, I mean, we're now finding like the first underground railroads went to Florida because Spanish would protect, you know, the slaves. So we're finding all sorts of things now because science is getting better and able to predate all those things. Yeah, going back further and further, and I think it'll just keep going. I was talking to a friend of mine who totally deals in stromatolites, which are these ancient cyanobacteria that supplied us with all the air we're breathing now, but they go back like 1 billion something years. And he was just, telling me today that that's going back farther and farther, and they're not thinking that there was just like a Precambrian or a Cambrian, or that there was actually earlier periods where life tried to happen, and it was snuffed out for whatever reason, and then it tried again, and then, you know, and then it tried again. So they're, like you're saying, it's going back farther and farther, and they pulled out that out of some shipwreck, they pulled out some gizmo that's made with gears, and it's some kind of an astrological thing, and it puts gears back in way farther than they ever dreamed. And it's like I mentioned earlier, they had a guy on National Geographic or something, he made a little gear with hand tools within like 15 minutes. And this is a precision little gear that'll go in a clock or something. So there was a lot of technology at that time, and they weren't as, you know, primitive as we thought. This little guy here, I'm hoping is Celtic. I believe it's Celtic. It's possibly Viking. And these three here, which I believe are like terracotta, this clay is very, for Roman, this is very diagnostic as Roman, and the little styles, you know, are noticeably Roman. And the things that they would have ate, one of the things is this fish sauce was a big deal. And it was made out of fish intestines, and it was a big deal. And the fluid that would form above was a fermented juice that made a drink that everyone liked. But then the lower stuff was fermented fish intestines, and that was something that the lower class ate a lot of, and then if it was done the right way, then the upper class had their own little condiment of it, you know, but pretty nasty fish sauce. So, but this could have been cosmetics, or it could have been any little thing too. I'm sure each one of these has a style made for a certain thing, but you could have had a lot of different foodstuffs in those. And we've got, I don't know, there may be 50 pieces of pottery that we got from Danny. Larger pieces, a lot of noticeable Roman.
These are pretty common to find them because those are completely intact right there.
Yeah, and it's probably because they were so small that they, this guy here, has a crack in it, but I think this is really something pretty cool. I'm hoping that that's a Celtic or a Viking, because it's really hard to get Viking pottery. I think what it is when they find that over there in those countries, there's dealers that pick over the good stuff immediately because they know where to go to, And I think that's why you don't get a lot of pottery from those different cultures.
I know, right?
And like that would have been made on a potter's wheel, Whereas this one here looks like that's just totally hand-formed,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at the piece, it's a potter.
Hmm?
Look at the piece, it's a potter. It's a potter.
You can still smell the fish sauce in that one.
Go ahead, yeah, smell that.
I smell something.
I have a nephew. He
I
would
hope
know.
it's the fish
Harry?
sauce, yeah.
Harry Potter? Dun-dun-dun.
And here we have a whole bunch of crosses, different crosses from a number of ages. Some of these are probably 1,000 years old. Some of them are probably maybe a little more or maybe a little less. Some of them look like they're Byzantine or from the era of like the not conquistadors, but the
Crusaders?
The Crusaders, yeah. And this is a whole little episode of study in itself. I'm not really good on crosses unless they're very ancient, like lead or bronze or something, which really go back. But the ground in those countries is seeded with these little crosses. I mean, everybody had little crosses, or many little crosses at that time because, that was religion was a big deal, and that was what represented who you were or what you believed in.
These big crosses with the little crosses, what are those?
The crosses are something that are a little out of my line of stuff, but I know there's a lot of books on those, and just the shapes and the little motif and the different, the persons that are on them or the effigies that are on there. That's all things that represent a certain age, but I'm really not good with the ancient crosses.
There's just so many.
Oh, and we've got a lot of them too. There's a lot more to.
Imperfections on that.
Yeah, that's
like right there above the handle. You can see where somebody couldn't get their finger in there to smooth it out.
And everything in there, yeah.
It's just kind of
and
a little vision into maker.
Yeah.
So do you, teachers, do you foresee lesson plans developing here, especially on the research? On the research end of things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good.
Well, it's like they can touch it. It's not on a device. It's not technology. They can hold it in their hands. They can feel the weight on it, I always tease, my sister always makes this anecdote about breathing in Abraham Lincoln's recycled air. And it's just like the most profound historical moment she's had, but the idea that she could have that moment just by breathing in air and thinking about putting something like this in the students' hands where they may not ever leave Missouri, but they've held a Roman coin or they've held a Crusader cross or they've touched Roman pottery.
Yeah, we go on vacation. I mean, we're a couple of history dorks, so I mean, our vacations don't center necessarily around, hey, we're going to this ballpark or this beach.
Right.
That's just kind of like a secondary thing to, hey, what's historical that we can go visit?
Yeah.
And so, we take cheesy, vacation photos and put those in presentations, also that kind of stuff. And they enjoy that. But I mean, getting them to understand that we went there, but taking them there is something else, and getting them to conceptualize the whole idea, is a struggle.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know which one is going to go off on a tangent and be somebody that makes a discovery or something, but once you handle the stuff and possibly, especially even in Missouri, there's just so much history buried, and it's something that, an archaeologist, you would say, well, maybe they wouldn't like you metal detecting in there. But if it's not a preserve or it's not some important site, even on my property, there was an early log cabin there, and the road that took the lead that ended up at St. Genevieve goes right through my property. And I've never metal detected it once, and I just know. And the road is this deep. And it's because it was ox carts. It wasn't just, you know, so if you're medley technique, you just get horseshoes, you're going to find oxen shoes, which is, it's a 2-point shoe. There are 2 pieces per leg or foot. And so it's something that there's just a lot of history that you can excavate without doing any harm. And in most cases, if you don't do it, there's just not enough archaeologists to deal with it. I guess I'm going back 35 years, downtown St. Louis, when they were clearing everything. There were no archaeologists to help out, and there were acre after acre of city blocks, privy after privy after privy, cistern after cistern after cistern, filled to the top with St. Louis's history. And I'm sure that a lot of surveys at that time were pushed aside because they want to keep excavating and moving. But me, and it wasn't just me, I was probably one of the more minor bottle diggers. I'm just calling us, saying bottle diggers. But there was probably about 10 people that would excavate constantly downtown. Whenever the bulldozer would get through, they'd be standing right there for them to get through, and then they would possibly, it happened many times, give the guy in charge of the lot a case of beer. Can we dig? And he would just, a lot of times they would just say, make sure all them holes are filled in by this tomorrow morning, or there's going to be trouble. But we're going to tolerate you guys if you fill in your holes. And sometimes the holes would be, it'd take you all night. There'd be a male and a female, and there'd be 5 female Johns here, 5 male Johns here, and by the time you excavate all those and try to fill that all in, you were dead. But we did it so that they would allow us to keep digging. Nowadays, I don't think they would tolerate anything like that down there. In fact, they'd call the cops on you, I'm sure. But at that time, you're talking about vast areas where under this much brick and rubbish, you know, you would find really clay pipes and gorgeous free-blown glass and all this crockery and cool stuff. And the men's side, it'd be Bowie knives, buttons, clay pipes, and whiskey bottles. And on the women's side, it would be rings, costume, jewelry, and it was always that way. Because at that point, some of them privies are pretty deep, and if you drop your pistol or something down, you're not going to really go get it. They had these guys called dippers. After a while, they would call them in to clean them privies.
Honey dippers.
It was a horrible episode, and a lot of them were that away, you know. But boy, we got so much. So what I'm getting at with this whole little spiel I'm saying here is there's a lot of cool things you can excavate and find and dig without being on some, you know, preserve or something, you know. And anytime you can find it, really, there's so many old buildings around here, and a lot of them are preserved type things, but the cisterns and privies behind them, if they ever get around to digging those, they'll have so many cool things to put on display then, because, and things that you don't want your old lady or you don't want your husband to know about, or there's things we found in the privies that I don't even want to talk about, but there's, I mean, it's, one time there was, I think it was 12 bottles of Dr. McMum's elixir of opium. So you know that guy was going back and forth to the drugstore. So there's a lot of funny things.
And it was fairly common that as soon as people got indoor plumbing and they stopped using the privy, that's just where their trash went.
That's where they started. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
And especially cisterns, you know,
Yeah.
you would keep that. But toward the end of their usefulness, man, they'd pile them full. And the problem with them is every time we dig down in a cistern, you get to a point where you encounter water, and then you're digging in the mud with glass and you're cutting yourself, and it just gets to be a hazard. But and then everything, so much is being buried right now in downtown St. Louis. It's just really annoying. There's very few people that actually know what's underground down there, and when you know, it kind of bugs you, because the construction, they'll do, maybe say they did a survey or whatever, and there's nothing there, but it's just full of stuff. I mean, it is just full of stuff, and there's just not enough time to dig it, and it'll shut them down for 6 months at a time probably. So, alrighty, what else we got here?
Well, all kind of fun things.
Oh yeah, you got those handy?
Yeah.
Okay, those are handy. Most of these, or at least a half of these, are Celtic, and a lot of them are these little effigies called Celtic riders. It was a little votive item that if you were a Celtic person at that time, it's usually a little man with his legs spread and just away so they'd fit on one of these little bronze horses, so you'd have a little rider riding the horse, and then usually there'd be a little square base that would come with these. And you may have those in your house on the mantle or something, and maybe be something that you would pray, or maybe you take those to the temple with you. And there's some Roman items in here too, like this little bird or eagle here. And I think I've seen a fly. A little fly effigies were a big Roman. You'd see them on jewelry and stuff of all the little creatures that have flies. But I really like Celtic stuff because it's very primitive, and it's a whole different culture. The motifs and the different designs that they use are totally different than the Vikings. They don't look the same at all, other than they're all bronze, and I'm guessing, looks like most all of these, you know, are all the lost wax cast process. Mm-hmm. So in other words, one of these little Celtic guys, would have been made out of wax, beeswax, and then you get the wax as hard as you could, cool it off, and then you would put clay around it, totally around it, except for one little area. Actually, you would have part of your little wax man would have a little thing called a sprue that would come up, a little hole, and that's where, after you melted the wax out, you would fire your clay, the wax would melt out, leaving the shape of that little man or that little effigy in there. Then you'd pour your bronze in, and then after that hardened, you'd break the clay away, and then you've got your little bronze effigy of whatever it would be, and then you can do handwork on it at that point or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot going on in there, and these effigies and different, they're called zoomorphic. Anytime they got a stylized animal on them, it's called a zoomorphic artifact, and so most all these would be zoomorphic artifacts, anything to do with animals, and some really cool stuff in there too. And it wouldn't surprise me that there's 3 or 4 things in there that are not really that old, or maybe possibly are a reproduction, but majority of them are real, you know, and they'll be a cool items to display.
There's like an item at the top that's like a thin.
I don't know
this looks like a tool.
Corner.
Yeah, it looks like a tool.
Some type of. Is that a scale?
That's a good.
Part of the scale?
Well,
Or is it-
possibly.
Maybe. Doesn't have the little hinge though. I don't see the little hinge. You usually see
Could
a
you
little
put it in
hinge.
your hand?
Yeah, they would do it that way too. Almost anybody that was at a market back then, whatever your currency would be in chunks or cut little pieces or something, so you pull out your own little scale, make sure that you were getting your money's worth.
Absolutely.
And that's something the Viking scales are popping out on the market now too, just because there's just so many people looking.
Guy, we
over
have
there.
about 7 minutes to show the last 2 displays down there. I just wanted to leave you
If
aware
we haven't
of
talked
time.
about these.
Alrighty, and these are kind of cool.
These are kind of cool.
Yeah. These
Well,
are called
it's all
Yes.
cool.
These are called fibulas, and these ones up here are called omega fibulas because they look like the symbol, the 21st alphabet of the Greek alphabet is the omega symbol, and that's why these guys, they look like omegas, so they're calling them omega fibulas. These ones down here are duck's foot fibulas, and they're partially an omega fibula with this duck's foot effigy, and that's because the area where these are from is one of the largest bird or waterfowl crossways on the planet, so there would have been a lot of geese and ducks and different birds, and so it was a big motif. I've got a lot of Viking jewelry that's just covered with little duck's feet, you know, really cool little duck feet, bird feet. And we didn't realize what the deal was until we found out that it was from Lake Ladoga area in Russia, and that's this big bird crossways there.
So this was jewelry, and I think you said these were also used just to hold your toga together.
Yeah. If you didn't have
Hold your
one of
clothes
these,
together.
your clothes would fall off, your
Yeah.
toga would fall off. So they were very important at that time to keep your clothes on. And there are just so many varieties. And this one here has a little bit of fabric on it. There's Viking woven fabric
Oh, yeah.
still on that. Not long ago,
Right there.
I was working with some little bronze, twisted bronze beads, and I started cleaning them, and I started seeing that these little things were going down the drain. And I stopped it, and then I got looking, and in each one of these little Viking beads, the little handmade woven cordage was still inside, and they were going down the drain, so I stopped that real quick, because how would you know? And I put them all in a little Riker mount, but it's cool because they're all handmade little twisted cordage. These right here are Viking decorations, jewelry, and these would be mostly worn by women. This right here would fit around the neck, and these baubles here would be kind of right here on either side, and they would have been at that time beautifully golden bronze color, of course. All these right now are so corroded that they don't look anywhere as beautiful as they would had they been back at that time. And these coiled bronze rings here are finger rings. Those are finger rings. And they did a lot of things with, I've got a lot of bronze wire that they've woven into such beautiful decorations that it looks like it would have been some kind of cordage or something. But it's actually bronze wire. So we have a lot of varieties of Viking jewelry that we'll have at the museum that came with this collection from Danny.
Just this chain is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, all those little links putting all that together.
Yeah.
I got some Viking chainmail the other day, which I was wanting to get. It was hard to get, and it's two little and there's little tiny microscopic rivets holding it together, each one of them. Wow. And there's like 100. It's like, how could they do that? But they did it, of course. These more Viking jewelry of different varieties. Actually, these right here are what I was washing at one time, where the little cordage was running out of them, and that looks like original material there. I'd have to look at it under a microscope, but that could be original cordage, handmade cordage from the Vikings. And this little motif here of the heart, this heart.
Oh yeah.
Okay, these are 1,000 years old, but my friend is working with this fur trade area in upper Michigan. They're finding these same shape out of silver that were traded among the Indians and the fur traders and the Hudson Bay Company, and that's just a European style that came across when they came across over here. That's why those are that same little heart shape. So,
got your headdress, your necklace over here, the one you wanted to wear.
Isn't that amazing?
These little bells.
yes, yeah. Yeah, I like Viking bells too. I'm figuring in the museum there's got to be some kind of a little push button we push where those will jingle, because that's ancient music and you're going to hear it exactly the way the Vikings did. And I like prehistoric musical instruments too.
I'll wear it after you cool it.
That's a piece of a network. That's a big,
I will wear
big
it.
bronze ring that went around the
Rich
neck.
called dibs.
Huh?
He was talking about it. He called
That would be a
dibs.
mess.
There you go.
No, we'll clean it up and you'll wear it at the grand opening.
Oh, I
There we
will.
go.
That would
Okay.
be so much fun.
Brute you are, because a lot of the neck torques for women are very thin and they're very common. Apparently almost everybody had a neck torque at that time. It was just a fashion of the time. And so we're going to have a lot of really cool stuff on display at the museum, you know, and not just fossils or dinosaurs or whatever. We're going to have a number of different cultures, which I think is going to really add to our museum, because you go there, you're thinking, oh, you're going to see some arrowheads, you're going to see some fossils maybe or whatever, but to be seeing all these different cultures, I think that's something that really, especially with the historical end of it, you know.
And before we close, it should be noted that this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
I mean, the collection
It's nasty.
fills a storeroom at a location that is under lock and key because it's so valuable. And this may not even be the best of the best. This
Oh,
is
it's
what
not.
I could haul over.
Yeah.
Guy and I went through the stuff and we filled up a couple of boxes, but I mean, what we have to put on display is just,
It's
it's
massive.
beyond amazing.
Jordan and I helped unload. And
That's
it was
right,
Many
yeah.
hours of
Yeah,
heavyweight.
that's
You
why
know-
that's why you look familiar.
What would really be cool is if we could, I mean, you can't have a degree or something that we can work with or something, but we can have a process or where you go through and you get to work with Egyptian and Viking and Celtic materials. You get to assemble possibly a broken pot. You get to do some things. And if you're going into an archaeology or something like that,
That is our timer, but
you're way ahead of everybody when you hit that, you know. So that's what we're hoping.
It's official.
it is official. It's not going to want to stop.
I'm going to keep talking. No.
I know, and so Guy has this gift of he can talk a long time. He's very, very
Knowledgeable.
knowledgeable
Oh, my
in
goodness.
the different things. So we're going to have to say adios because I think that we're going to be shut off
All right.
very soon. So,
No problem.
But thank you so much, Guy. I know they're going to have to kind of splice this. So, and for all of you have come to just be here tonight. It makes you want to see more, I'm sure, right? But thank you for all being here and giving up your time. But we loved having you come back.
Good
Come back
deal.
when we open the doors.
Appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.